Hello, and welcome to this talk about the introduction of service in Sainsbury's. First thing I wanted to do was give you a little bit of background about shopping before self-service was introduced to set the stage, as it were. So when Sainsbury's first opened in 1869 and then expanded their business into the new century, they operated as counter-service branches. Sainsbury's counter-service shops all followed a similar layout. They had a central position in a shopping parade, as John James Sainsbury, the founder of the company, declared that corner branches were only good for banks. The shops were long and thin and had a small frontage. And this made it easier to keep goods cool and provide maximum service for serving and displaying goods. Typically, these shops only had a sales area of around 2,200 square feet. And sometimes, to increase sales space, the shops extended through the window and onto the market street outside. Counters ran along the walls of the shop, and sales assistants were positioned down them at each department. By the 1930s, most stores had 6 departments. There was dairy, bacon and hams, poultry and game, cooked meat, fresh meats, and groceries at the back of the store. Top spot was the one near the window, and this was reserved for displaying seasonal specialities. And in between those times, it was often used by the butler, who would display lots of energy whilst they packed up their butter and then packed up the butter. A polished wooden screen divided the front of the house with the back office and the rooms behind it. And customers would have queued at each individual department to select their goods, which would have been prepared and wrapped for them. And then in some shops, the customers would have paid at each department. And in other years, often later years as well, the cashier's office was located at the shop in the middle of the wood screen, like you can see here. After the end of the World War in 1949, Sainsbury and fellow Sainsbury director Salisbury visited the United States as part of a Ministry of Food drive to promote improvements in food retailing methods. They originally went to look at the display and sale of frozen foods, but came away impressed by the of supermarkets, which at the time did not exist in Britain. Service stores in America had originated during the Depression years, when warehouses were converted to sell packaged groceries with minimal customer service, and had since developed into a highly efficient method of retailing. However, shopping patterns in America were very different to those in post-war Britain. In 1950, 59% of American households own a car, compared to only 12% in Britain. American shoppers travelled by car to do their weekly shops at large edge-of-town supermarkets, whilst British customers shopped frequently for small amounts in high street stores. Some critics said self-service would never take in Britain, but later Alan Sainsbury remarked at how lucky we were that they were wrong. The old counter-service ways of shopping were time-consuming and labour-intensive. Customers queued at each counter in turn and had to wait for their to be weighed, cut, and wrapped to order. Self-service shops moved the wrapping and weighing of goods from the front of the shop to the back rooms. At first, the staff and equipment required to package goods proved expensive, but gradually costs were reduced as manufacturers began to package their goods before sending them to Sainsbury's. Customers selected their goods from specially designed display shelving units and put them in a wire basket, then paid for everything all at once at the checkout. One of the few criticisms of the new self-service supermarket was that it's the easiest way in the world of spending too much money. It's such fun to pop things in the basket yourself that you forget you have to pay for it on the way. However, until rationing, some items such as margarine and cheese were still served at a counter in order to control how much each person bought. Sainsbury's was not the first shop to introduce the idea of self-service to the UK, but it became the first to specifically design shops to operate this way. A few retailers, notably the London Cooperative Society, had previously rearranged fittings to provide a limited range of self-service groceries. In 1950, Allison Foster ordered the complete refurbishment at 911 London Road in Croydon, which had previously been used by John James Sainsbury as a model store for the suburbs when it opened in 1882. With a floor area of 3,300 square feet, this was one of the few Sainsbury's stores suitable for conversion to self-service. Post-war building controls were strict, and the store was refurbished under one of 100 licenses granted by the Ministry of Food to retailers who were prepared to experiment with self-service. There were a number of new and innovative ideas implemented in the Croydon shop. Croydon store featured 4 staircases linking the shop floor to the basement preparation areas. These allowed shelves to be filled with a minimum of disturbance to customers. In later stores, something called push-ups were installed, and these were lifts which used compressed air to push heavy goods up from the basement to the shop floor. Perspex used in aircraft during the war and provided to be a light and hygienic substitute for glass. It was used extensively by Sainsbury's in counters, lighting cupboards, and display equipment, including a special waterfall stand for displaying eggs. The freestanding display shelves, known as gondolas, were designed for Sainsbury's by John Jones of Frederick Sage and Company. They featured legs encased in stainless steel sleeves, which could be lifted up for cleaning, and space for displays at each end of the units. Fluorescent lighting had been developed for use in wartime factories and provided good visibility on the shop floor. At first, the blue light cast by lamps made food look unappetizing. Over time, however, colour rendering was improved, and by 1957, lighting was used to create lighted ceilings. In 1949, Sainsbury's converted part of the Selston store in Croydon into a laboratory for the design of new refrigeration techniques. Sainsbury's innovations included open-top refrigerated cabinets to chill foods and air-cooled counters allowed perishable foods to be kept under a perspex canopy, as well as cold preparation rooms. New lighting, mechanical equipment, and refrigerators meant that the new self-service shops required a lot of power. Fire regulations also required that banks of batteries be set up in the store basements for emergency. 911 London Road remained open to customers during the refit. A range of modern features were installed, which would eventually become standard in all stores. The refurbished store opened at 8:30 on the 26th of June 1950, and it was something of an anticlimax. It appears that many regular customers had become so used to the disruption caused by the store's conversion that its completion generated little excitement. Indeed, it was reported that when the doors were opened, the staff found a queue of just one, and that was, in fact, the manager's wife. It was only later in the day that crowds began to fill the shop. After years of shortages and queuing, most customers welcomed the ability to make their own choice from a larger range of goods. Assistants were employed to help older customers adapt to the new style of shopping, but there were still a few who were less than impressed. One Croydon customer who was offered a wire basket by Alan Sainsbury threw it back at him in contempt. Increasing the number of self-service stores was a slow process. Post-war building regulations meant that permission was usually only available to rebuild on bomb sites. These sites were often too small to be ideal, but stores were rebuilt with a new emphasis on technology and cleanliness. Grinstead store featured prefabricated chilled counters and air-conditioned preparation rooms. Local residents were offered behind-the-scenes tours and when the shop opened on the 18th of September 1951, the press described it as the most modern hygienic food shop in the south of England, and possibly in the whole country. The first fully purpose-built self-service store opened in Eastbourne in February 1952. And it was followed in 1994 by a store in Southampton, which featured the first service display of fresh meat. New self-service stores were also built on the London County Council estates at Grange Hill and Debden in Essex. By December 1955, Sainsbury's had 11 service branches. By the end of 1959, a further 15 self-service branches had opened, including 4 in the new towns of Hampstead, Crawley, Harlow and Stevenage. The move towards self-service was aided by the gradual deregulation of foodstuffs. In December 1948, jams and preserves were the first products to be taken off the ration. Other products took longer to be deregulated. Milk was not decontrolled until January 1950, and the point system remained until May 1950. Therefore, things only gradually improved. Tea was derationed in October 1952, sweets in February and eggs in March 1953, sugar in September 1953, and butter, margarine and cheese 7 months later. It was not until meat came off the ration on the 3rd of July 1954 that wartime restrictions finally ended. The availability of these ration goods made it much easier to extend the size of stores. In 1955, the largest self-shop in Europe opened in Sainsbury's in Lewisham. The store had a sales area of 7,500 square feet, which was twice the size of the trading area of the Croydon branch, and it had a glass-walled ventilated room for cutting and wrapping butter. Lewisham also boasted Sainsbury's first produce department, which sold fresh apples, oranges, bananas, grapes, lemons and potatoes, along with the existing range of salad vegetables. Self-service was such a massive change in British shopping habits that Sainsbury's produced adverts and leaflets and handed them to their customers to explain how to do it. Sainsbury's first priority in store development was to replace its old counter service shops. Larger shops would accommodate new product ranges, checkouts, refrigerator and freezer units, bigger displays, and to increase customer numbers. Where replacement was not possible, shops were brought up to modern standards with improvements such as new shop fronts and refrigerator displays. Sainsbury's high street shops tended to be long and narrow with insufficient frontage widths for checkouts. Lack of space meant that some shops, such as those at New Malden and Wood Green, were only partially converted to grocery self-selection, whilst adjoining premises were used for meat and provisions service. I just wanted to show you a quick snippet of a film which shows, it's a film that was created in 1963 by Sainsbury's, and it's called Shopping Day. And it's basically a film created to show the day in the life of Sainsbury's company. And here's a very small snippet just to show you what it would have been like to shop in one of these early self-service branches.
Hello, Bonnie. Price change with effect from tomorrow.
gone and got himself a job.
Oh.
Yes. Dad and I are very disappointed.
Oh, you will be.
Well, it hasn't been easy, you know, to keep him going, but there was a light, wasn't there?
Oh, yes, you can't tell them nowadays.
I know.
Still, he's earning money, isn't he?
Yes, not much to start. He could have earned more. He's done very well.
Sorry about the abrupt ending there. The film suddenly shoots off to a laboratory at Sainsbury's head office. But if any of you want to watch the full film, it's available on our website. It's called Shopping Day. It's also linked on our homepage. So have a look. It's an absolute film.
Hello, Bonnie.
Self-service transformed British retailing. Nowhere was this more apparent than in Drury Lane, where John James had founded the business. On the 11th of November 1958, the original shop at 173 Drury Lane was replaced by a new self-service branch. The decision to close the old store had not been easy, and most people assumed that Sainsbury's would never, under any circumstances, part with it. In the end, the realisation that the shop was no longer safe forced the issue. On their annual Christmas visit to Drury Lane, the two directors, Alan and Robert Sainsbury, found the shop so crowded that they feared that the floor would give way. In 1962, Tony De Angeli, news editor of The Grocer, estimated that the 9,000 self-service shops operating in Britain accounted for about a quarter of the foods sold by the nation's 140,000 food shops. Sainsbury's rate of conversion was slower than its competitors, but well ahead in terms of both turnover and size of new stores. By 1960, only 10% of Sainsbury's shops had been converted to self-service. By the decade, this figure had risen to almost 50%. During the same period, sales increased 2.5 times and profits had almost doubled. However, the transition to self-service supermarkets took more than 30 years to complete. The last Sainsbury's service shop, this one here at Rye Lane in Peckham, closed its doors on November 1982.